Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Schmidt from Geothermal Rising. Thank you for joining us today's Full Steam Ahead webcast, where we'll be looking at how to grow our organization and our industry in an inclusive manner. We've got a fantastic group of speakers who have joined us for this discussion. So I'll now pass things off to GR's State and Local Community Engagement and DEI Manager, Amelia Letvin, and let her introduce you to the rest of the panelists.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes,
we can.
Thanks. Thank you for the introduction, Brian, and it is a great pleasure to present this to the geothermal community and discuss different ways of growing the organization and industry. We've got a great bunch of industry experts, and I'll quickly go over their names and the topics we're discussing, starting with Katarina Yaird. She will introduce the DEI committee and our accomplishments to date. Next, we'll go to Elizabeth de Jong, GR Board of Directors, and she will discuss the Board of Directors and the intentional growth through representation. Next, we will go to Bert Short, who is with Berkshire Hathaway Energy Renewables, and he will discuss the geothermal industry perspective, which ultimately sets the tone for the geothermal community. Next, we'll have Mimi Egg discussing goals and future initiatives of the DEI committee, and then Loretta Williams-Gurnell of Supergirls Shine will present how to create impact through mentorship. After that, Monty Morrison, another member of the GR board, will present a case for DEI in geothermal, discussing his personal experiences in the industry. Then we'll move to Rita Okoroafor, who will present metrics by the numbers, diversity studies that have been done by Geothermal Rising, and how we can move with intention and thoughtfulness. I'll finish it off with a short statement about how to stay involved and get involved if you are so inclined. And now moving on to our first presenter. Oh, first our host, Brian Schmidt, librarian and industry analyst. And now Katarina Yaird. I will take off my camera.
All right, thank you so much, Amelia. Yes, my name is Katarina Yaird. Glad to kick it all off here for our Full Steam Ahead webinar with some GRC DEI initiatives that Geothermal Rising has been doing, and in the past put it on a very high level in terms of getting a task force organized already in 2021, and the DEI committee bloomed out of it. I think that goes to show the importance of DEI for Geothermal Rising as a organization, and it definitely has a mission there in improving the discussions and interactions around diversity, equity, and inclusion within our geothermal community and the energy markets. And I think you can see waves happening in that direction with the DEI Champion Awards that were introduced in 2022. Those were recognizing people and individuals advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM, especially within geothermal. And in 2022, the first recipient was Katie Smith from Zanskar Energy and Minerals. And last year, we had Joanna Ostrom from Gradient Geothermal receiving that noteworthy award for sure. Very much deserving. Thank you so much. And next slide, please. We also focus the Geothermal Rising Conference with a lot of DEI-focused events, along with the papers and panels. And here's a list of the papers that we encouraged for that diversity and inclusion in geothermal community that was presented at GRC in 2022. And then in 2022 as well, we featured the DEI panel to discuss challenges and opportunities in fostering an inclusive environment. and as well in GRC last year, we kicked the conference off with a with a DEI-focused panel, and that was very well received. We see the benefits of including DEI-focused items within the very otherwise technical focused conference for sure. And ongoing efforts for geothermal rising, we'll continue to publish resources and host events like these webinars to educate and promote DEI within the industry. And the organization will remain dedicated in connecting geothermal community globally, as well on the focus of inclusivity and equity. And with another geothermal focused symposium on indigenous geothermal activities will be hosted before the GRC conference this year in Hawaii. So make sure to put that on your radar, that it will be our first indigenous focused geothermal symposium. That will be, like I said, right before the GRC conference in Hawaii. And Jessica Eagle Bluestone will be leading those efforts. So feel free to reach out if you want to learn more on our webpage, but also, you will find the details over there for that. That is all I had for you today. So thank you all very much. And on to Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth DeYoung. I'm a board member for Geothermal Rising. I was elected and began serving in January 2020. I have professional career experience in working for both state and local governments in California, and currently I'm the Government Affairs Manager for Southern California Public Power Authority. Today, I wanted to give some insight as to the organizational structure of Geothermal Rising's board. About 4 years ago, Geothermal Rising underwent some significant changes. One of the more obvious changes was that the name of the organization transitioned from Geothermal Resources Council to the fully rebranded Geothermal Rising that we now all know and love. At the same time, and more behind the scenes, the board for Geothermal Rising was restructuring the board composition. So if we could go to the next slide. So let's start with the basics. You may be asking, what does the board do? So board members are all volunteers. Every board member participates in a different way. Board members chair or co-chair or participate in a committee or 2 or 3, depending on the time commitment and requirements for that committee. This includes committees like communications, which I'm more familiar with because I'm on that one, but we're focused on marketing, social media, et cetera. But there's also committees like the Nominations Committee, International, Student, Education, Foundation, Inspectors, Membership, Business, and Finance. There is a Policy Committee, which is notably handled very different than the other committees, as the members of that committee are paying members with finances kept separate from the rest of the organization. And then also, and this role primarily falls on the board president and vice president, but the board also has the role of overseeing Geothermal Rising's executive director. So the board meets at least 3 times a year with additional meetings as needed. Next slide. So what has changed in the last 4-ish years, right? Geothermal Rising's board has been trimmed down to have 15 members on the board currently. The smaller size encourages active participation from board members, having more sense of responsibility and ownership over their contributions. It also fosters efficient discussions and decision-making where all board members have time and responsibility to contribute. Board members now have term limits of 3 years per term, totaling 6 years consecutively, so 2 terms. Applying term limits allows for change. My hope is that you're seeing, and will continue to see through these presentations, the theme here that Geothermal Rising is transforming. These changes are captured in the organization's bylaws. Next slide. But more relevant for today's discussion, Geothermal Rising board members now have assigned seats to represent a subset of Geothermal Rising's members. This means that there are board seats aimed at representing government, which is my board seat, consultants, developers and operators, international vendor suppliers, heat pump, research academia, and direct use. There are also 3 at-large seats, so there can be at least 1 at-large seat open for each election cycle. And then, as I mentioned earlier, and per the bylaws, there is a board member appointed by the policy committee, and there is also an ex officio board member that is the president of the student committee. The board made this decision to have assigned board seats to ensure consistent representation of all Geothermal Rising's members. Since each board member's term is typically 3 years, except in special circumstances, there's typically 4 board member seats open for election each year. So this honeycomb that you're looking on the screen is just to show those board seats. It doesn't show the schedule of what the election cycles look like. If we could go to the next slide. As I mentioned, the goal of having these assigned board seats is to ensure representation of all Geothermal Rising members. It helps to bring in diversity of thought and ideas as a result of the board members having varying members that they represent. This change results in the elected board members contributing those thoughts and ideas that are more aligned with the different backgrounds and experiences of the varying subsets of Geothermal Rising's members. Our hope is that it also motivates members to seek a role on the board who might not have felt there was a place for them previously. So how does someone qualify for a specific board seat? Nominees are encouraged to campaign with the specific seat and members that they'd represent in mind, and keep that perspective if they are elected. Board candidates do not have to show or provide any specific credentials. Instead, what they do is they represent how they will be a good representative for that seat to the Geothermal Rising members who vote for them to represent that seat. Ultimately, of course, as I'm saying, it falls on the election run by members. If we could go to the next slide. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. So once the DEI committee was established by the board, and as Katerina discussed earlier, the committee developed a DEI statement. The Geothermal Rising Board then formally adopted the statement in May of 2021. And we could go to the next slide. So further, the DEI committee drafted a strategic plan to provide a framework by which the DEI committee members can continue advancing the organization and the industry's diversity, equity, and inclusion. The DEI strategic plan was approved and adopted by the Geothermal Rising board members in May of 2022. So in closing, Geothermal Rising's board aims to lead by example at representing all of its members, pursuing inclusive growth as an organization. These changes I've outlined make long-term impacts, not only within the organization, but hopefully extending out into the industry. Geothermal Rising has shown through these and many more examples that we are committed to being inclusive, diverse, and equitable, that we aim to represent everyone in the geothermal industry and even expand to work with industry partners, for example, those in energy or oil and gas. There are many more opportunities for inclusive growth that geothermal can and will be pursuing, in large part thanks to the efforts of the DEI committee. So with that, I'll pass the speaking baton on to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
So hi, I'm Bert Short. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the HR manager for BHE Renewables, and I work at the Cal Energy plant in Calipatria, California. Next slide, please. Next slide. So a little bit about me. I'm a father. I'm a retired veteran. I served for 23 years in your United States Navy. I have an MBA from Bellevue University. And Bachelor of Environmental Engineering Sciences from the University of Florida. I'm also the past president of our Pride Connection ERG here at Berkshire Hathaway Energy. And I'm also a member of the Palm Springs Gay Softball League's Ethics Committee. So here's a couple pictures. That's my daughter at the top. She's Japanese American. That's when she went back to Japan. My son, who is now 11, that's when he was 6. That's me in the Navy. Over on the right is my daughter when she graduated, and she's carrying a Japan flag because her grandparents were in Japan and couldn't travel here because of COVID. The middle bottom is me with a coworker at one of our professional development seminars I'll talk about. And the picture on the left is me marching in the Pride Parade in Palm Springs last year with some of my softball team. Next slide, please. So for Berkshire Hathaway Energy Renewables, we have several objectives. We want to create an inclusive culture. We want to attract, retain, and engage our current workforce. We have strategic partnerships I will talk about, improve our communications, both internal and external, and make sure we have accountability. And I'll talk how we do that as we progress through the slides. Next slide, please. So this four-pronged approach for training, over the past couple of years, we have rolled out inclusive language training for all of our employees. We also have rolled out an unconscious bias training for all employees. We have a 3-year DEI plan that we update annually, and I'm one of the leaders of that plan. One of the main reasons I'm speaking to you today. We like to tie DEI initiatives to our scorecard through key performance indicators. And then we try to measure. We do self-ID campaigns every year and try to increase participation with our employees. We look at our attrition and how certain groups are affected. We have a very engaged and diverse hiring program. And we also have some supplier diversity initiatives, such as, I'll talk about that on another slide. For engagement, we do surveys. We've partnered with Gallup to do an engagement survey. Our leaders have created engagement plans, and we participate with our other Berkshire Hathaway Energy companies in an annual professional development summit. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of the first professional development summit. This was in 2022 in Des Moines, Iowa. I was unable to attend because I had COVID, but as you'll see on the next slide when we get there, they made sure my face was there. So these are our different employee resource groups. We have the bucket trucks holding a pride flag over downtown Des Moines. And a really neat story is that after this pride parade, showing all the companies participating, we had several retirees from Mid-American Energy, one of our sister companies, reach out to us and say they thought it was incredible. They had been a member of the LGBTQ plus community for over 30 years and never thought that their company would show support for their community this way. Next slide, please. So since I couldn't attend, I have been planning to attend for over a year. They decided to plaster my face on the side of trucks and carry it around on placards. And I'm sure everyone in Des Moines thought I had died, but no, I just had COVID. Next slide, please. This is from our professional development summit last year that was held in Portland. And we had AltaLink, our Canadian company, was there. Pacificor was the host company. We did this in conjunction with the Juneteenth parade. And you can see the Pacificor bucket trucks back there holding the Juneteenth flag. We did some community engagement and had several speakers. And that's my CEO on the bottom left over there, Alicia Knapp. She was walking out front carrying one of the banners. And it was just an incredible day for everyone. Next slide, please. So when we talk about impactful partnerships, we have a BHE Foundation that has awarded scholarships to students and that are aligned with various groups such as ACES, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, SHIP, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, OSTEM, Out in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, and also with SACE, the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineers chapters at California colleges. So we give out scholarships annually, and then we ask those students to partner with our Berkshire Hathaway Energy employees as mentors. And I had the opportunity 2 years to mentor a trans student who has now graduated and is in graduate student doing research. So an incredible opportunity. to get our names out there and to show support for these organizations, and also to recruit diverse candidates. Next slide, please. So other strategic partnership steps, we've created a supplier code of conduct. And we also ask suppliers to fill out some surveys on the types of representation they provide. That's under the supplier qualification policy. We've also partnered with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in their Stronger Together program for diversity outreach. Next slide. Another area is focused giving. So each year we look at where we give donations, and each year we try to balance that out. So last year we increased funding to veterans causes, increased funding to LGBTQ plus causes, and increased funding to groups supporting race and ethnicity causes. Just try to find a more balanced approach to giving. Next slide. These are the logos for our employee resource groups. We have Beauty for Black employees and allies, Pride Connection for LGBTQ+. We have several women's groups, employee resource groups. The one that BHE Renewables participates in is called WIRE, Women in Renewable Energy. We have one for Asian and Pacific Islander employees called Inspiration. We have one for Latinx, Latino, and Latina employees called Our Familia. And we also have one for our veterans. We are looking at creating one for employees with disabilities, so that may be rolled out in the next year or two. The employee resource groups typically meet once a month. These are cross-business, NV Energy, Pacificor, BHE Renewables, AltaLink, and our pipeline group and Northern Natural Gas participate in these. It helps us create incredible networks and provide support to folks in those groups. Next slide. So in closing, I would just like to say that it's important that we reach out to these groups and try to recruit and retain them. I work in the Imperial Valley, where it can be very difficult to recruit at times. And when we simply look at our demographics, where over 50% of the eligible workforce are females, and we look at our current, say, our operators out in the field, if we have 60 operators, we are lucky to have one female operator. So we've got to do a better job of trying to make these jobs attractive and bring those folks in and show them the development and growth opportunities that they have in our organization. So as we expand in geothermal, or perhaps get our lithium manufacturing off the ground, we're going to need those kind of folks. So I'm happy to discuss any of these diversity initiatives with anyone, and I'm sure the board members can get my address, my email address for you. Thank you for your time.
Hi, can everybody hear me good? Are we good? I'm going to assume we're good, but I'm going to start. I'm doing goals and future initiatives. My name is Mimi Egg, and I am gender fluid, so I go by she, they, he, and whatever else you're comfortable with. I work with Egg Geo, and I write for industry magazines in the geothermal and union sector specifically. Next slide. Pretty please. So this is just a reminder, we're going over goals and future initiatives, a little redundant. We can go to the next slide. And just as an intro, like I said, I write for industry publications. I do social media. It's what I went to school for. I have a little boy and I love him, and I will speak about him anytime I can. I consistently support and advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I founded a theater company focused on allowing people who are trans, non-binary, people of color of all sizes and disabilities to be able to participate in shows. And it's been really amazing. And I am a big supporter of the unions. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about why diversity, equity, and inclusion are important, and specifically what we as individuals can do, and what has worked in the past, statistics, and what we're going to do, or what I would exhort you to do. Next slide, please. The colors on this are crazy. That was not intentional, but we're waking up to these bright colors now. So on average, there are 76% fewer women than men working in the energy sector. A significant difference from the average 8% gap seen in total workforce. So as we've discussed previously, there are far too few women in the energy sector, and despite them making up 39% of the global labor force, women only account for 16% of the traditional energy sector, which is a clear issue and something that we obviously need to discuss a little bit more and dig into. Next slide, please. So diverse teams in the energy sector are proven to be more innovative. They're successful and inclusive of broader customer bases, with an 8% clean energy workforce being people of color. So I would say far too few, but statistics have shown through the Climate Council of 2023 surveys that the energy sector is more successful with inclusive teams. Diversity is giving results quickly. Next slide, please. So fewer than half of surveyed energy workers across race and ethnicity were optimistic about their company's diversity and inclusion initiatives. I would say this is why we're here. We have an opportunity to open up the floor for people that are diverse, people from different backgrounds, disabilities, and orientations to speak up. And I've seen huge success just from listening to people. So we're going to continue that as much as possible because we need to hear voices elevated from every standpoint. Next slide, please. So despite 71% of workers in the Center for Energy Workforce Development and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion focused listening sessions describe the industry as not very diverse, there's a desire to see more industry initiatives for diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the issues is that the title, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, tends to porcupine people a bit. They panic, sometimes get very defensive. And I think it's important that we approach this topic gently and with open hearts without any accusation, telling people that they need to do better, but instead offering people opportunities to prove that they are interested in listening to voices and elevating the voices of others instead of speaking over them. Next slide, please. So return on investment is really important. A lot of people automatically jump to numbers if that's important to their position. So studies are showing that organizations that prioritize diversity and inclusion see a 30% higher procurement of ROI. And teams with diverse members have 87% better decision-making capabilities. And I've seen that very clearly in situations where people from various backgrounds have incredibly valuable perspectives, and listening to those people, and I'll emphasize this 1,000 times while speaking, listening to these voices is going to show results. It has, and it will continue to. Next slide, please. Very important to me as someone who's on the spectrum. According to one research study, a professional with autism can be up to 140% more productive compared to an average worker when they're placed in a job that aligns with their abilities. I find that when I'm put in a position where I know I'm comfortable with what I'm doing and it is my strengths that are being elevated, I am able to work quickly and efficiently and put my whole heart into it. Disabilities that are not necessarily visible are really important to prioritize. People who are able to really work hard and fit into a specific peg of the industry. So I think that focusing as well on people with autism, and I do believe that a lot of people are on the spectrum without diagnosis. It is a very wide spectrum, allowing people to find their niche and let them run with it as much as possible and speak to them and listen. Absolutely important. Next slide, please. So to finish it off, I want to talk about what we can do. And I think focusing on vocalizing interest in inclusive environments to make a point to be intentional with our language surrounding diversity in the workplace and to destigmatize the awkwardness around discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like I said earlier, a lot of people will panic when you bring this up and assume that you are telling them that they are not doing it right or telling them that they are not being accepting. I think approaching these topics with a very intentional, kind, and open-minded approach is vital to getting people to listen. And to be mindful of how others are approaching these topics, to find productive ways to educate peers on the importance of DEI, to speak to the people that you know and make sure that they understand why it's important to use pronouns and to understand the culture and background of people that they work with and to be mindful of disabilities without pushing them away or making them feel vilified. And to be open to learning more from those who bring diversity to the workplace. I've said multiple times, elevating those voices instead of speaking over them. I am constantly interested in hearing what people from different backgrounds and people with different abilities are going to say. So that is what I have to say. I'll end it off by saying I am absolutely thrilled that anyone is attending this and wanting to learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I hope that you're able to take home what some of these absolutely incredible speakers say and apply it to your work. Thank you so much.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Monty Morrison. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am entering my 40th year in geothermal energy here in September. I've been with 8 different companies and I've managed 22 different geothermal plants, as well as some others in the renewable sector. I have a chemical engineering degree from University of Nevada, also a PE and an EMT. So being an older white male, I've been the antithesis to DEI in the geothermal industry, and I've watched how that has really not worked. I've been a DEI advocate since working on my first DEI committee more than 20 years ago with Constellation Energy. They were a very large East Coast company, used to be Baltimore Gas and Electric. We had more than 10,000 employees, and the geothermal portion was very small. So I was able to rebrand myself and get out of the mold of geothermal and get into some really interesting organizational development potentials. And one of those was in DEI, and it was enlightening. Further to that, my son, who is homosexual, came out and was very open with me on his DEI work as he works with the Cleveland Guardians baseball team. And he is very, very involved in DEI and really introduced me to the term of subconscious bias. And, I argued with him and I said, well, no, I don't. And he goes, everyone does. And so it's been enlightening and it's been encouraging to me to work in this industry and now to carry on that within the GR board and with this webinar. So my role in this webinar is comparing DEI to safety management. I've been a safety professional since the late 90s, and with my role as well as a DEI encourager and implementer, I find very interesting parallels. There's similar resistance. There's an old term, that's the way we've always done it. If we always do what we've always done, we always get what we've always got. That's a very challenging paradigm, and power generation falls prey to that paradigm countless times. And it does today. This isn't 10 or 20 years ago, it does today. Safety is very personally risky if you don't manage it and work within it. And you can be yourself injured, your colleagues, and others nearby. Whereas DEI is culturally risky when it's avoided either intentionally or accidentally. Ignorance of the benefit, can be, it cannot be understated that if you are just ignorant to it, and that's not derogatory, it's just a fact. If you're ignorant to it, you don't know what you don't know. And that is a very challenging area to be in. When you can have the open mind to say, what don't I know? You can be more enlightened. Safety is much further along. OSHA came about 40 plus years ago, but it still faces resistance. Being safe-minded, whether it's in construction power plants or in your daily life, can slow you down, and it can be annoying, but the risk is that you or others could be hurt. Now, DEI is now widely known, and even to the highest levels within our current political campaigns, it's used both positively and derogatorily, and that's unfortunate as it's not widely accepted, and now even used as it's been weaponized as a term, and that's truly tragic. So my manner is of encouragement. I've been a teacher and instructor in my roles of managing power plants, and when you do that, you're able to affect people and their lives. In safety, you need to live it, be the first, always follow it. And when I don't, all of us make mistakes. The first thing you need to do is thank those that remind me to wear my hard hat or my safety glasses, and don't get aggressive, but get appreciative that they reminded me. They love to pick on the safety person, and I cherish that. Equally with DEI, you need to live it, embrace it, and show it in your professional and personal life. We all have biases. We all have tendencies to either in humor or in life or in politics or in anger. And we need to change that in order to really embrace it, I think is the best term. The way that we can do that is to educate and not to train. Training is a very instructor-driven process. Again, it can be used in a punishing manner in safety, whereas it's instructing a behavior, and it's not always well received. Whereas education is much more enlightening. It can be thought-provoking. It's two-way or multi-way dialogue. It's opening minds and ideas. And hey, I never thought of that type approaches. You can see it in people's eyes. Whereas teaching them in a manner that is for recitation on a test is very different than educating them on how to be inclusive in order to benefit themselves and those around them. Also, the greatest way of getting people on board is to provide educational opportunities, because there isn't yet enough awareness of the value. Mimi's presentation clearly showed the value of DEI. Much in the way of safety, we have to be cautious that we don't equate people not getting hurt with money. But in order to show a return on investment, you can equate the value of people not getting hurt. Once someone's hurt, it's difficult to apply a dollar figure without being crass or callous. It's the same with DEI. When I started in the industry itself was virtually ignoring more than half of the population because it was very broadly male dominated, and it was not very broadly encouraging of people of color. And so it was missing an opportunity to be grown and improved and better through encouraging the entire population for our industry. And when I've done teaching, people will say, no, I have no interest at all in geothermal or in power or others. And that's great, because if they want to do anything else, it's good to know what you don't want. Conversely, if we're able to include, we more than double the opportunity of people able to come into our industry to make it better and to make it more efficient, and really to share that with the world. In closing, we need, this is helping people to care and understand the value of inclusion without mandatory training. And it's a tough plan, but it's important line to tread. If we do training, and I'll use there's always been the training for, they call it sexual harassment training. And I've always corrected people in HR. It's like, you need to add the word prevention, because, we're all good at being harassers, but we're not always good at prevention. The same with DEI. If we educate and not put people through a training, but share with them the value, we're all going to be better off. I'll be available for questions at the end, and I hope you appreciated some of my more a little different approach than some of the others on the committee.
Hi, can you hear me? Thanks. All right, so I've listened to everybody. We've really, shared so much about DEI. I am Rita Isuru Okorafor. I'm one of the board members of Geothermal Rising. I also am an assistant professor at Texas A&M University. I have been with the DEI task force since it started, and been part of many of the initiatives that we are seeing today. Next slide, please. So what I want to talk about today is some of the metrics that have driven the kind of strategies that we're seeing today with the DEI committee and Geothermal Rising as a whole. Okay, next slide. Yeah, the previous slide acknowledged that there were a couple of us that came together to put together the DEI strategy. And the presentation that I'm sharing today is born out of work that was done by a group of people. Now, what's involved in developing a DEI strategy? The first thing is setting the context. We needed to let ourselves know that we didn't have enough information to know what kind of directions to take. And so we decided we were going to do some sort of survey to understand what are demographics, what are the issues that the people in the geothermal community are experiencing, and what can we do to make a difference? And what I'll be talking about here is mostly the assessing of the data based on what we acquired over 2 years. Next slide, please. So what we did was we sent out 2 sets of surveys. In the first year, we created a baseline, and we plan to use that to build upon subsequent years. We received 411 responses. And then in the second year, we did a follow-up. We didn't exactly ask the same questions as the first one, but we just needed to make sure that our demographics in response to the questions were, what was the status? We dropped a few questions, and I'll talk about them as we move forward. Next slide, please. So in terms of demographics, the first thing we observed between the 2 surveys was that in the first set of surveys, where we asked many questions that had to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, we talked about gender, race, etc. We had 50% of the respondents in the age range of 25 to 44, while 12% of the people were 65 years of age. And then when we did the second survey and we dropped certain questions that were really, would I say, very specific questions on gender, on orientation and things like that, we had more respondents from the people over 65 years of age. Next slide, please. In terms of demographics, it was quite difficult to pinpoint responses to a particular ethnicity. And the reason is because people have the opportunity to choose more than one ethnicity. Now, I think the lesson we have learned is perhaps in subsequent ones, we'll ask for what's your primary ethnicity that you're associated with to help us to draw conclusions. But this is what the demographic showed, and we did have a group of people who preferred not to answer or preferred to self-describe. Next slide, please. 2 key things that were kind of enlightening. One of them has to do with disability. So most times we see disability as physical disability. But from the survey, we were able to learn that there were disability beyond the physical. And this was something that we needed to be able to take into account, make accommodations for, and improve on accessibility. We did have a survey that looked at the different gender identities, and we were very pleased to find out that we did have people who are not only male and female, but we had a diverse group of gender identities. We still had people who preferred not to answer, and we weren't quite sure how to deal with that piece of information. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things we tried to look at was discrimination, both in the events that the geothermal rising provides and in the industry itself where people work. We did receive feedback on the feeling of gender discrimination. Now, anything you see here in blue means the respondent didn't have any feeling of discrimination at a geothermal rising event, as we see on the left, or in the workplace. But zooming into the ones that did say yes, we found out that a greater proportion of the people who felt discriminated fell into the category of females. For male respondents who were able to take out what the feedback were, and most of the issues they faced were ageism, racism, condescending remarks, unconscious bias, Monty mentioned that, for physical appearance, and then workplace politics. So these are the kind of issues that the males felt. On the other hand, the female respondents, they felt sexism, ageism, and non-inclusive workspace, especially those that had to go to the field. The workspaces weren't very inclusive for them. And so bearing this in mind, we took this feedback and we decided to see how we can make recommendations, both for geothermal rising events as well as the geothermal industry. Next slide, please. So we looked at near-term strategies. They were bordered around 4 things: creating awareness, education, as Monty will say, improving the association, being accountable as an organization, and providing accommodations for people. And to address key of the main issues reported by the respondents, which we have on the left, we decided to provide near-term strategies while looking at long-term strategies. So I wouldn't go into all of this, but you've heard so many of the things that have come out of it. But, very simple things like, names, affiliations, and pronouns on name tags so that people will not be incorrectly addressed. Somebody was assumed to be a waitress in one of the events, so that people are not treated that way. We've been able to help with the behaviors of exhibitors. So similar to the kind of things that Bot mentioned, and Bot, I think we have a lot to learn from you. Kind of statements on, what we expect from, people who are working with us and what kind of actions will be taken if there's failure to comply. Okay. Next slide, please. The accomplishments have been listed. Katerina has mentioned many of the accomplishments. I wouldn't go through them again. Next slide, but it's just saying that these accomplishments came out of looking into the data, analyzing the data, and being able to draw the kind of near-term goals that we want to achieve. Next slide, please. And so the main takeaways that we took from the baseline survey and the survey that followed was that, first of all, we did not get a complete demographics of the geothermal community. And so we expect that as we keep on collecting more data, we're going to be having differences in the demographics. We did learn about the fact that the disabilities we need to be making accommodations for were beyond physical, but included sensory, intellectual, emotional, and development. And then we looked at the different kinds of discrimination that was felt at geothermal rising events, as well as in the geothermal workplaces, and began to provide recommendations for how this could be managed. The geothermal rising community has been taking a lot of steps towards advancing DEI, creating inclusive workspaces, and training and educating people And we are also tracking our ways, we plan to track our ways in which we are, what the impact of our initiatives in the community. So with that, I will say thank you, just to acknowledge all the people that took place, that participated in the surveys. And we do say that if we do send out surveys, we look forward to your feedback. We always try as much as possible to make it anonymous. And your future participation is always welcome. Thank you very much.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Monty. I will be the final presenter for this webcast. My name's Amelia Letvin. My pronouns are she, they, z, and I am the DEI manager at Geothermal Rising, which is a new position. I just started 6 months ago. And the fact that Geothermal Rising prioritized having a DEI manager on staff is a testament to the efforts and direction that the organization as a whole is heading towards. To wrap it all up and conclude this webcast, I want to talk about a few ways to stay involved, to stay connected. A lot of great ideas have been presented in this webcast, and it has been recorded. It will be uploaded to YouTube for additional review. And additionally, the slides will be available on the Geothermal Rising webpage on the diversity page, because I think there were some slides that didn't advance. But in addition to that, a few other ways to stay involved. We've talked a lot about showing support openly, listening, being educated. Don't call it a training. A few initiatives that I have started with GR since I've begun is adding a DEI section to the weekly newsletter that goes out, Geothermal Community at the Core. And in addition to that, we're looking into collaborations and partnerships with diverse groups that will benefit the membership and the industry. I'd like to do a final little blast that if you want to join the DEI committee, feel free to email me, amelia@geothermal.org. I encourage you to attend the Indigenous Geothermal Symposium in Hawaii, which will be October 24th through the 27th in Waikoloa. And also, my DEI journey began with my volunteerism with Women in Geothermal that has really pushed forward a lot of great initiatives within the geothermal community. And you can find out more about Women in Geothermal at the website, womeningeothermal.org. So with that, we will start the Q&A portion of the webcast.
Looks like we have a few questions in the Q&A box. If you have any other questions you'd like to add, feel free to do so, everyone. The first two are addressed to me, but I'm pretty sure they're actually intended for Bert, asking if you would be able to share the supplier code of conduct and asking if you would be able to share the diverse suppliers qualification policy.
I will check with my procurement group and see if we can do that.
Great, thanks. And then if you can, would it be okay if we send it out to the attendees today then?
Sure.
If you get approval. Great, sounds good. Thanks, Bert. And then the last question on here is not addressed to anyone specifically, so I'm going to open it up to the whole panel. And if anyone has a good answer, feel free to jump right in. Can you describe a specific example of a DEI initiative you will call highly successful that you have seen or being involved in the geothermal or energy sector? Why would you rate it highly successful?
One more time, Brian, can you give us that?
Yeah, definitely. Can you describe a specific example of a DEI initiative that you would call highly successful that you've seen or been involved with in the geothermal or energy sector? And why would you rate it as highly successful?
Brian, I could speak to that quickly. It deals with mentorship, of course, right? And so we have a mentorship program within Supergirl Shine Foundation where there's a pipeline of young, diverse talent that is coming through the pipeline. And one of the successful stories that we have is one of our high school students she had 4 internships prior to going to college. So what that did with her is diversified her application. It strengthened her application, but it also helped her to see a broader picture because they were in different industries. She's now at Trinity University on a full ride. She's now changed the economics for her family, which now changes the economics for her to come back into the community to do greater works. And so that's what I feel like when we expose and provide access earlier than later, it changes how we can now mentor this talent when they become professionals and rise to the C-suite.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Loretta.
Thank you.
Brian, I have a quick, easy one.
Mhm.
So a very easy DEI initiative for any group is if you have a meeting, it could be 10 or 20 people, start your meeting with the DEI moment. And it could be anything that's going on in the world currently. You could talk about the Olympics and how diverse that was. Pretty much anything. But if you start your meetings with that 2 or 3 minutes of a DEI thought initiative, maybe discuss something dealing with either I heard it called subconscious or unconscious bias. It just gets people to lean in and discuss those issues kind of in a safe forum.
I like that. That's a great
Nope.
idea, Bert.
Yeah, Bert, that's a great way of putting it because so many companies now are starting out most meetings with a safety moment or environmental or EHS or, personal wellness to lead with DEI first and then move to the next because it's more people based. That's a really solid idea.
Let me share a couple. So one is general. I used to be the chair for the Society of Petroleum Engineers Women in Energy, now Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And one of the things we did was to develop a database of women who are qualified, who could be invited for panels and sessions, such that if there is any event taking place and they need a female on the panel, there was somebody that they could reach out to. And what we've observed over the years is that there are fewer panels where they are all male. So we've seen that happening where we have 1 or 2 women in panels, so that's improving. The second thing is recognition of women, and not necessarily for just DEI related things, but also for their technical abilities. Now, the people to nominate them, we didn't have a lot of them, and the people to be nominated, we didn't have them. But when we took deliberate steps to be able to say women should come together, try to find out who are these women who are advancing the energy space, the geothermal rising space, technically and otherwise, try to nominate them. We began having females being recognized. So I think those kind of things are highly successful. And then when a woman sees another woman being nominated or receiving an award, she becomes encouraged. And that is inspirational. And we keep passing it on.
That's great, Rita. I really appreciate the idea of that proactive, having a list already ready to go, so that if something comes up, you're just ready to bang, plug someone in there. I like that. Anyone else got any other
I think piggybacking off of Bert, I really enjoyed people introducing themselves with pronouns. I know it's very simple, but even for people who are cisgender, it's really nice to remind everyone that we all have pronouns, whether or not they are neopronouns or non-cis. I think it's really cool. And I think it opens up the floor to being a little more comfortable and accepting with something that is probably very new to a lot of people discussing this kind of thing. So yeah, I've enjoyed that a lot of us have started out with our pronouns, and I think that that is a productive way to begin meetings as well as just a regular introduction.
I agree. I think that's great. Thanks, Mimi.
Of course.
If we don't have any other questions, then I would just like to thank all of our panelists today for what a great discussion this has been, and thank all of the attendees for being here with us. And have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Brian.
you.
Thank you all.
Stay safe.